All right. Good noon, everybody, and welcome back to Self-Righteous Blood. We're studying the Judges here a little bit. It's good to have you with us. If you have not been up to date on our previous studies of Judges, you can go back in my timeline a little bit and find those if you're the kind of person who likes to have things in order. If not, we're happy to have you along for the ride on Judges chapter 3. We didn't have any questions on Judges chapter 2, so we'll just go ahead and get straight into things. As a matter of quick review, Judges chapter 1 and 2 were sort of the preface to the book. In chapter 1, we see the remaining conquests of the nation of Israel against the Canaanites. Most of that's recorded in the book of Joshua, but several of them are recorded here for us in Judges. And then in the second chapter, we saw more specific things. We saw where the Israelites really failed. Actually, we saw that in chapter 1, but we saw the consequences for their failures in chapter 2. It established the idea of the cycle. As I mentioned, Judges chapter 2, if you want a summary of the entirety of the book of Judges, chapter 2 is it. It establishes the cycle of the nation being comfortable, fat, lazy because of all the good things God is giving to them, and they fall away, they begin worshiping idols. As a result, God punishes them by bringing in an enemy nation to oppress them, and then God raises up a judge. As we mentioned, the better term would probably be deliverer, but we're left with judge, and he ends up saving them from the people, and as long as the judge lives, they're following God. But when the new generation comes around, the cycle starts all over again. That's really what's established there in Judges chapter 2. The first part of chapter 3 is going to be the end to the preface of the book of Judges. So let's go ahead and start reading there. If you got your Bibles, we're in Judges chapter 3, beginning in verse 1. Now these are the nations that the Lord left to test Israel by them, that is, all in Israel who had not experienced the wars in Canaan. It was only in order that the generations of the people of Israel might know war, to teach war to those who had not known it before. These are the nations, the 5 lords of the Philistines, and all the Canaanites and Sidonians and Hivites who lived on Mount Lebanon, from Mount Baal Hermon as far as Lebo Hamath. They were for the testing of Israel, to know whether Israel would obey the commandments of the Lord, which he commanded their fathers by the hand of Moses. So the people of Israel lived among the Canaanites, the Hivites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And their daughters they took themselves for wives, and their own daughters they gave to their sons, and they served their gods. So, as a little bit of an extra from chapter 2, we saw that the Israelites did not entirely drive out the Canaanites like they were supposed to. You might recall that seems to be because of the fear on the part of the Israelites. They're afraid of the chariots of iron that they have. So, generally speaking, it is the Canaanites who are on the flat lands who stay there, and the ones who are in the mountainous regions where chariots don't work all that well, those are the ones who end up being driven out, generally speaking. So the Israelites drive them out, but the ones who remain, God says they are going to remain there, and there are several reasons for this. It's going to be a punishment unto you. It's going to be, in this chapter, it says that it's going to be so that the previous generations, or the new generations, will know war as well. This is not to imply that the only people who are ever going to invade the Israelites are going to be coming from the inside. In this chapter, we're going to see 3 separate invasions of Israel. And of the nations that end up doing this, it's only one that is kind of, sort of, within Israelite territory. You'll also notice, if you're paying really close attention, that there has been already a little bit of a changeover from where the conquest was. Just because a place was conquered doesn't mean it remained that way for long. Why that is the case, it's hard to say. It's something similar to what's going on in chapter 1, when the Benjamites, or well, rather the people of Judah, they end up taking over Jerusalem, but then later we see the Benjamites in there, and there's still some Jebusites in there. Hard to say exactly what's going on there. My best guess is that the Israelites come in, they destroy everybody in there, they drive everybody out, and then when they leave, the people just come right back in. And the second time around, for whatever reason, the Israelites just don't feel like dealing with this, and so they end up cohabitating with them. I think something similar here happens in Philistia, because you'll notice in chapter 1, when Judah ends up going into Philistia, they end up taking some of the major cities there. I believe Ashkelon, Gaza, and Ekron, I think, are specifically mentioned in chapter 1. But you'll see in that list that we just read that you have 5 lords of the Philistines. Well, it just so happens that there were 5 traditionally Philistine cities. You have, as we already mentioned, Ashkelon, Ekron, and Gaza. And then the other 2 are Ashdod and Gath. Those 5, and some of those might sound familiar to you right now because they're in the news right now. That's part of the disputed territory, or rather the war zone between Israel and Palestine right now. Anyway, if it's mentioning that there are 5 lords of the Philistines remaining, then it stands to reason that it's talking about these 5 major Philistine cities. So it's very likely that once again the people of Judah come in and they take over those cities, and then they just leave and let the Philistines come right back. Among some of these other groups that remain here, you'll notice verse 5, so the people of Israel lived among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And their daughters they took themselves for wives, and their own daughters they gave to their sons, and they served their gods. If that list of groups of people sounds familiar, it shows up a lot, especially within the Pentateuch. There are 7 nations that are commonly listed that all fall under the heading of Canaanite. There are a lot of wars that Israel has during this period in its history that God hadn't already preordained. For example, they have wars against the Moabites, the Edomites, the Amorites, the Amalekites, and none of this was something that God said had to happen. He did say that these 7 nations had to be driven out, specifically because of how extremely wicked they were. But the rulers of these other nations, had they done what was right, and just, take example, the Edomites. At one point, Israel was trying to migrate through their territory. And if they had just simply been allowed to do so, there would have been no problem, and God would have allowed the Edomites to continue, but instead, the Edomites refused to allow the migration, and this causes a war. And it wasn't a necessary one. But these 7 ones God had ordained from a long time ago. These ones have got to go. Their wickedness must have been so much greater than even these other nations that we know practice a lot of wickedness. If you're very familiar with that list, you might notice that one is missing. That would be the Girgashites. Hard to say what happened to them. Perhaps they were entirely driven out of the land of Canaan. Hard to say exactly. But the remaining 6, they're all still right here, indicating that the Israelites have not done everything that God has commanded them. And they taking daughters for wives and giving their sons and all that, that indicates that they melded culturally with the Canaanites. This is a problem, not because you have an interethnic or interracial marriage thing happening here, but you have a problem of interreligious marriage happening. Once again, when you have an interreligious marriage, that's not necessarily a problem in and of itself, but it's an indication that we're accepting these idols into our lives. And maybe you can worship our God as well, but he's just as good as your idols. That's when we're having a serious problem. All right. Now that we're done with the preface, we're going to start looking into the various biographies of these judges. Let's look in verse 7. And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God, and served the Baals and the Asheroth. Therefore the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. And the people of Israel served Cushan-Rishathaim 8 years, but when the people of Israel cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer for the people of Israel, who saved them, Othniel the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. The Spirit of the Lord was upon him, and he judged Israel. He went out to war, and the Lord gave Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, into his hand, and his hands prevailed over Cushan-Rishathaim. So the land had rest 40 years. Then Othniel the son of Kenaz died. All right, so we're to our first oppressors over the Israelites, and we're introduced to this character by the name of Cushan-Rishathaim. He's fairly famous in the Bible, if for no other reason that he's got a really long, difficult name. He's kind of up there with Maher-Shalal-Hash-Baz as far as how difficult his name is to pronounce. It probably wasn't his actual name, though. The term Cushan-Rishathaim translates to Ethiopian of double-dyed, that's dye as in hair dye, of double-dyed iniquity, like evil. So what does this mean? Well, it probably means something like a person whose skin has turned extremely black because of his evil. I understand there are severely racist elements to this particular nickname that was probably given to him. It's a little unclear where the nickname comes from. It was either coming from Cushan-Rishathaim himself, saying basically, and by the way, that's what the Ethiopian detail has to do with it. People from that region wouldn't know much about sub-Sahara Africa except the region of Ethiopia, but they would know certainly that the people from Ethiopia, who are very much a part of the ancient world, were black. And whoever gave him this nickname, either himself as a way of trying to intimidate his enemies, saying, look how evil I am, I might as well be twice as black as the Ethiopian because of how much evil, or it might have been a nickname given to him by the Israelites. Once again, severely racist, and I suppose it goes to show you that throughout the history of the world, even, people haven't actually changed all that much, which is a very sad thing. Nevertheless, he wasn't a good guy, clearly. Whether he gives himself this nickname or somebody else gave him this nickname, he most certainly earned it. By the way, it probably wasn't an accurate description. At least I certainly hope not. He was from Mesopotamia. That is, if you're familiar with your geography around Israel, there's this area of the world that's known as the Fertile Crescent. If you were to go there today, the term Fertile Crescent might almost seem like it's ironic, but it was at one point an extremely lush and fertile area of the world. It's now pretty much just desert. It's in modern-day Iraq, where Mesopotamia would have been, and he probably would have looked like most modern-day Iraqis, which would also look pretty similar to what the Israelites would have looked like at that time. So, not actually black in skin, just a nickname. Anyway, it says that for, how many years again was it that he served them? People have served Cushan-Rishathaim about 8 years. What this means is a little unclear. Most likely, this is a client-state relationship, meaning that the Mesopotamians have taken over the Israelites, and now they're forced to pay tribute to Cushan-Rishathaim. Whether or not that was the case, perhaps they were also just made into slaves, but when you see some of the relationships between the Israelites and the other oppressor nations, it would seem more likely that they were just forced to pay a strong tribute to the Mesopotamians. And then it says that the Lord raised up a deliverer for the people of Israel who saved them, Othniel, the son of Kenaz. We've already been introduced to Othniel. He showed up in chapter 1. You'll recall that Caleb made the offer that if anybody were to take over this city, they can have my daughter. And I'm not going to try to pronounce her name again. You all have made fun of me enough for that as is. But you can have my daughter's hand in marriage, and Othniel was the one who took up that call. It describes him as Caleb's younger brother, and last week I mentioned that while yes, we would consider this incestuous, it does appear to be coming from a time in which there is a pure genetic among the people. It also might be worth considering, and this was pointed out to me, that the It's entirely possible that they're using the term younger brother there, but the Israelites had a habit occasionally of skipping generations. You see that a lot in the genealogies that happen. Often, especially if they intentionally want to make a nice even number, they'll say that so and so was the son of somebody else when in reality he was his grandson. It doesn't seem to bother them as far as accuracy goes to occasionally skip a generation. And so when it says that he's his younger brother, it's entirely possible that Othniel was actually his nephew. Yes, still incestuous, but I mean, people were marrying their cousins as a regular thing up until the 19th century, right? So not uncommon by any means. Strange in our culture, and rightly so, but not uncommon historically. This also would go to explain this idea that we saw earlier that you might have watched me struggling with a little bit, the idea that the entire generation of Caleb and Joshua had passed away, but you still got Othniel. Well, he might be the nephew, and that might make a little more sense. Anyway, God goes to Othniel, and he chooses him as the judge. Normally, when we're talking about the list of judges, Othniel is the very first one, and I think that's probably about right. You might be able to make an argument that Joshua was a judge, but as judges were described in chapter 2, Joshua does not meet the criteria. He didn't deliver the Israelites from being oppressed in any way. So Othniel, I would consider to be the very first judge. It says in verse 10 that the Spirit of the Lord was upon him. This phrase occasionally happens with the judges, and it has been suggested that the phrase the Spirit of the Lord would indicate that almost superhuman powers were put upon these judges, such as strength. I find that a little doubtful. For one, the only one of the judges that we see having some sort of superhuman powers is Samson. And although many of the judges do incredible things, I don't know if you could really call it superhuman powers. I would just say that God is watching over their battles, is what is meant by the Spirit of the Lord is upon them. And you see that consistently with many of the judges, not just one. But you're entitled to your opinion on that. I have plenty of friends who are wrong. And for 40 years, Othniel is going to rule over Israel as a judge, and they have peace. But remember that cycle that was established in chapter 2. When Othniel dies, the people are going to start committing idolatry again. So we go to verse 12, and we're introduced to judge number 2. We had Othniel, now we have Ehud. And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He gathered to himself the Ammonites and the Amalekites, and went and defeated Israel, and they took a possession of the city of palms, and the people of Israel served Eglon, the king of Moab, 18 years. So, once again, the cycle goes. After the generation of Othniel, the people again become rebellious. They start serving the idols again. And now God strengthens the Moabites against the Israelites. The Moabites make a coalition and alliance with the Ammonites. Those are two sister nations, by the way. Both of those are descended from the incestuous relationship of Lot with his daughters. Her daughters were named, or I'm sorry, his sons were named Moab and Ben Ami, or Ben Ammon. Yeah, that was it. I'm sorry, Ben Ammon. And from that we get the Moabites and the Ammonites. And so we have nations that are closely related to the Israelites. Nevertheless, they make themselves enemies of the Israelites. And then you have the Amalekites, who were very much a thorn in the side of the Israelites while they were in their wanderings. They would often make raids against the Israelites. And the Israelites did not completely destroy them during their invasion of Canaan, or right before their invasion of Canaan, I should say. And so they were a problem for the Israelites for quite a while. So this alliance is led by Eglon, king of Moab. He ends up, it appears, to establish a capital in what is called the City of Palms. This is often thought to be the remnants of Jericho. Now, Jericho would not actually be fully rebuilt for a long time yet. But wherever this is, it seems possible it was in Jericho, or probably very close to Jericho, because the city of Gilgal, I believe, is mentioned a little bit later as a place where Eglon is, and that would be very close to Jericho as well. So Eglon is ruling over Israel now, and once again, he is forcing tribute from the Israelites. Verse 15. Then the people of Israel cried out to the Lord, and the Lord raised up for them a deliverer, Ehud, the son of Gera, the Benjamite, a left-handed man. The people of Israel sent tribute by him to Eglon the king of Moab, and Ehud made for himself a sword with two edges, a cubit in length. He bound it on his right thigh under his clothes, and he presented the tribute to Eglon king of Moab. Now Eglon was a very fat man. And when Ehud had finished presenting the tribute, he sent away the people who carried the tribute. But he himself turned back to the idols near Gilgal and said, I have a secret message for you, O king. And he commanded silence, and all his attendants went away from his presence. So this is what's going on here. God has raised up this new judge, Ehud. He's going to be in charge of delivering the Israelites. So this is what Ehud does. It says that Ehud is a left-handed man. This is probably an expression to, but it's a little unclear exactly what this means, because the literal translation of the words is that his right hand was bound. So it could be that Ehud was a crippled man and that his right hand was completely non-functional, and so he needed to use his left hand. But also, this is the phrase that is used whenever somebody is left-handed. Judges chapter 20, I believe, mentions a good deal of left-handed Benjamites who were slingers. And so there's two possible interpretations of significance, as far as I can see, of him being left-handed. One is that he had no use of his right hand, and so he didn't look like a particularly threatening guy, or the exact opposite, that he was a mighty warrior, one of the famous left-handed Benjamite slingers. Why left-handed makes such a big difference, it's hard to say. I think I've been told it has something to do with war positioning, and being able to do this with your left hand makes you a little bit more formidable, allows different formations. Either way, he wasn't somebody to be trifled with, but perhaps they thought he was. He goes, and it's his job to take the tribute to Eglon. So who knows what everything this was? It was probably food, livestock, perhaps servants, definitely money, right? All of this stuff he brings to Eglon, and then he sends all of his people back. And he says, I have a secret message to you. This is our mentioning of Gilgal, by the way, when it says he turned his face towards the idols in Gilgal. But I have a secret message for you, O king. And Ehud is going to choose to have all of his servants leave the room. In verse 20, and Ehud came to him as he was sitting alone in the cool roof chamber. And Ehud said, I have a message from God for you. And he arose from his seat. And Ehud reached with his left hand, took the sword from his right thigh, and thrust it into his belly, and the hilt also went in after the blade, and the fat closed over the blade, so he did not pull the sword out of his belly, and the dung came out. Then Ehud went out into the porch, and closed the doors of the roof chamber behind him, and locked them. When he had gone, the servants came, and when he saw the doors of the roof chamber were locked, they thought, surely he is relieving himself in the closet of the cool chamber. All right, here's your fair warning. When I explain what's going on here, it's going to be really gross. But this is what happened. Ehud goes to Eglon. They're alone in what is described as a cool roof chamber. You might think of it almost as a throne room. And he says, I have a message from God from you. And Eglon stands up, and you can see him almost leaning in to hear what this message is. There's clearly a lot of pride on the part of Eglon. And Ehud then takes this sword that he has hidden on his right thigh. This also might be the significance of the fact that he's a left-handed man. Perhaps the servants, the guards of Eglon, would have been looking for a hidden blade on Ehud, but they might have thought, we'll check the left thigh, because if he's got it on the inside of the thigh, he'll take it with the right hand. but since he was a left-handed man, that wasn't searched. That's a little bit more of a far-fetched explanation, but it's a possibility. It's something to think about. He goes in and he takes this. It says that Eglon was a very fat man. And Ehud, by the way, forged this sword himself. It said it was a cubit long, and so that was from the elbow to the tip of the finger. I'm a really gangly guy, and so I got a really long cubit, but the idea is it was a short sword. And he takes this and he stabs him directly in the stomach. And Eglon was apparently so fat that the sword goes all the way through, and the fat manages to enclose it. It says the sword comes out on the other side and that the dung comes out. Yes, this is really gross. It would have been really painful, and it's an assassination, but that's what happened. Judges is a gross, violent book. We mentioned this is called Self-Righteous Blood. You're going to see a whole lot of blood in this book and some really gross stuff. Ehud then escapes. A lot of people have made a lot about the fact that it says that he escaped out the porch and then locked the door behind him. One commentator even suggests that there might be some sort of automatic locking system. I'm not really bothered by the order of things. As I already mentioned, Judges doesn't seem to worry that much about being in chronological order. So yes, it says that Ehud escaped out of the porch, and then it says he locked the doors, but to me, it seems the most logical explanation of what's trying to be said here is that the actual order of things is that Ehud goes and locks the door to the chamber, and then he escapes off a back porch that was apparently in that area. It's his escape off the porch that makes me think that Ehud wasn't actually crippled in his right hand. And so if you were to ask me, you got a gun to my head, why does it say Ehud was left-handed? I would say he was probably considered a mighty warrior. And the fact that he's apparently nimble enough to escape off of a porch that's on a roof chamber, that seems to indicate to me that he was in pretty good shape and probably had the use of both hands. But maybe not. But once again, gun to my head, I would say the left-handed is to indicate that he's a great warrior. Anyway, he goes out, and the servants wait for a while, and they remember that thing about the dung, or your version might read intestines, the guts spilling out of Eglon. Well, the servants aren't hearing anything for a bit who are outside of that locked door, and they try the door, and it's locked. But they smell that, and they say that he might be, your version might read that he's covering his feet. That's a euphemism. Think about it. When you're going to the bathroom, which is admittedly also a euphemism, but one you're probably more familiar with, and, you're doing your business, where half of your clothes going on your feet. So when they say he's covering his feet, I believe the ESV here rendered it, he's relieving himself. That's much more direct. Basically, they smell what's going on, and because of that, they think he's relieving himself. And it appears there was some bathroom-like chamber here as well. And they keep waiting around and waiting around. And I don't know if we actually got to that part, so let me start reading again. Verse 24, when he had gone, the servants came, and when they saw the doors of the roof chamber were locked, they thought, surely he is relieving himself in the closet of the cool chamber. And they waited till they were embarrassed, but when he still did not open the doors of the roof chamber, they took the key and opened them, and there lay their lord dead on the floor. So Ehud has all of this time to escape because the servants think that Eglon is relieving himself until they become embarrassed and they start knocking on the door. Are you okay? And then no response, obviously. So they take the key and they find out that Eglon is dead, but at this point, Ehud is long gone. I'm reminded a lot about how Joseph Stalin died, actually, with this. I don't know if you knew this, but famously, when Joseph Stalin died, he had given strict commands to his higher-ups that nobody should disturb him until he woke up in the morning. And he didn't wake up in the morning. He had a pretty severe stroke. And it's possible he would have survived that stroke, except it took a really long time for anybody. And of course, nobody wanted to be the one who disobeyed Stalin, be sent to the gulag or whatever. Eventually, I think it was a maid who took the key and opened it up and found out that he had been suffering from a stroke for hours. Perhaps if he hadn't done that, he would have survived. I think of a very similar thing going on here with Eglon. He demands a certain prideful respect from everybody, and it might have, I don't think it would have saved his life, but perhaps it would have gotten vengeance on Ehud, although I think you might be able to agree there's also a providential hand of God in all of this. It seems quite clear God was watching over Ehud right now. Okay, verse 26. Ehud escaped while they delayed, and he passed beyond the idols and escaped to Serah. When he arrived, he sounded the trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim. Then the people of Israel went down with him from the hill country, and he was their leader. And he said to them, "Follow after me, for the Lord has given your enemies, the Moabites, into your hand." So they went down after him and seized the fords of the Jordan against the Moabites, and did not allow anyone to pass over. And they killed at the time 10,000 of the Moabites, all strong, able-bodied men. Not a man escaped. So Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest for 80 years. So Ehud takes the Israelites, and they go and they take the fords of the Jordan. Once again, if you know your geography real well, you might know that the Moabites and the Ammonites are all over on the east side of the Jordan. So they take the fords of the Jordan, the places where you can cross over. These are choke points. They wait here, and anybody who comes to try to attack them, they kill, and it's 10,000 Moabites that God gives into their hand that day. And the land has rest for 80 years because of the acts of Ehud. Judges chapter 3 has one more judge that is mentioned, and he only gets one verse. After him was Shamgar, the son of Anath, who killed 600 of the Philistines with an ox goad, and he also saved Israel. So this one's much more lacking in detail. Why? Who knows? But there's not much to say about it. We can certainly extrapolate that the Philistines were now oppressing Israel after this period of 80 years, or at least a portion of Israel, and that Shamgar is raised up by God to deliver the Israelites once again. There are a couple of interesting things about this. Apparently he kills 600 Philistines with an ox goad. Maybe this is another extremely Herculean feat on the part of a judge like we see from Samson, although it seems more likely to me that this is just how many he kills over a lifetime. It's not like Samson killing all these Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. It's more like Shamgar's favorite weapon, for whatever reason, was an ox goad, which, if you didn't know, looks something like a spear, but it's not really a tool for killing, and so that was interesting enough on its own. But this is probably how many Philistines he killed over his lifetime, along with other warriors that he's with. The interesting part of it comes up with the name the son of Anath. Now that might not mean anything, but Anath was the Canaanite goddess of sex and war. And that's strange, right? Why is it mentioning that he's the son of a idol? Once again, maybe it's just coincidence that his father really just had that unfortunate name, but it has been suggested that this either A, is just a phrase that means he was a warrior, or B, perhaps he was a warrior and he wasn't actually even an Israelite, so he would have been a proselyte, perhaps the first proselyte mentioned. I don't know if I can think of any other proselytes beforehand. I mean, I guess you could argue Moses' family would be proselytized as well, so probably not. But either way, just something interesting here. Once again, we have precious little to know about Shamgar. All we really know is that he was a great warrior. So, Judges chapter 3 has introduced us to three of the judges so far: Othniel, Ehud, and Shamgar. Really appreciate you taking the time to study this with me. And next week we will be in Judges chapter 4, Lord willing. Until then, I love you all, and I hope to see you soon.